If we were playing bingo, you'd have one with the way this channel's trajectory is going. This is the third video in a row about a revenge-hungry man who happens to dual-wield pistols, and while venturing down the road of vengeance, he shreds his life into tatters. Though, in the case of Silas Greaves, that's left up to debate. Let's talk about Juarez, Gunslinger. The Call of Juarez series is a bit of a strange one, seen as the first game, Call of Juarez, was an immersive sim in loose terms, the sequel, Bound in Blood, being a prequel with open world mechanics, the third, The Cartel, a lackluster COD knockoff. Though I haven't played it, and I doubt it's as bad as people say it is, the most aggravating thing about it from what I saw is that it dropped ideas from Bound in Blood to be COD, and the as-of final game in the series, Gunslinger, an arcade shooter. Despite the ever-changing gameplay ideas and implementations, the series has almost always stuck to the Wild West, and outside of Red Dead, and to be frank, Red Dead sans Revolver is more open world than anything else, and that brief moment that Red Steel 2 was all the rage, there aren't a lot of shooters that set themselves in the era or use the aesthetics. You could spitball theories, mine being that just like there aren't many World War I shooters, the reason why most FPS developers don't make one based on the Wild West is because gunfights are more methodical and lack pizzazz, until the cows come home or they start singing Home on the Range, but I would like to avoid that. If you think Gunslinger's story is connected to The Cartel, you'd be right. Call of Juarez The Cartel was not a critical or commercial success, being derided for many things, its major flaw that it stepped away from the roots of the series, that being cowboys, six shooters, and high noon duels. Ask anyone about games where you play as cowboys, half of them will respond Red Dead, the others either Call of Juarez, Gun, Dark Watch, or some combination. Being the publisher for Techland's efforts, Ubisoft sent out emails to confirmed owners via Uplay system of Call of Juarez The Cartel in an attempt to understand why the game was so repulsive. The email contains a questionnaire which asks players about what console they own, which of the Call of Juarez titles is their favorite, how would they rate The Cartel, and which character they picked. This was meant to gauge what Techland should be focusing their efforts on, and though many people at the time were skeptic of there being another Call of Juarez game after The Cartel, because bad games in a somewhat positively reviewed series don't get sequels? These emails would serve as a prelude for September 6, 2012, the date that Gunslinger was announced. Despite The Cartel being what people said at the time was a train wreck, it served a purpose for Techland. In an interview with Digital Spy, associate producer Nicholas Joy expresses that with The Cartel, we tested things on the previous game and completely failed. We learned a lot of lessons in terms of production organization, production value that we should put into the game, what to focus on. Sometimes you have to fall flat on your face before you realize what works, and that was what Techland was doing. Of course, another failure would be the end of the series, so this next game had to be a hit, co-writer Xavier Pinnon saying as such in an interview with Game Developer. When we started drafting the game with Techland, we had a few guidelines we really wanted to stick to because we were on a mission to save the Call of Juarez brand. Literally. We knew coming back to the Old West was a must, not only because of the reactions to The Cartel, but also because the fans of the series told us, quite clearly, being his exact words. Though heading back to the Wild West and dropping co-op because no one played it, Gunslinger was still going to take risks. For one thing, it was going to be digital only. When explaining why, Blaze Krakowyak, Techland's international brand manager, told Xbox Achievements, that's a complicated subject because there are many different reasons, starting with the fact that digital releasing seems to be the future and people are going more in that direction, but mainly because our partner is Ubisoft, one of the biggest supporters of digital releases with high quality and high creative potential. 3 years prior to this interview, Ubisoft had graced the world with Uplay, their own answer to Steam storefront. While the writing wasn't on the wall for physical releases, and hopefully it never will because I like to actually own my games, this will come back later, it was much easier to sell experimental games digitally as seen with I Am Alive in 2012. As many of you try not to remember that game, what a shitty joke that no one will get, it's clear that my usage of experimental here refers to the game's budget. Going back to Xavier, he told Game Developer that the reason why the game used a comic book style for its cutscenes was because they were part of this this relatively cost-conscientious strategy. We wanted to spend money on short, efficient animatics to open and close each chapter. However, Krakowyak would further add in the achievements interview that the choice was also an artistic one. The game is all about telling a great Western story, and if you consider the nature of the myths surrounding the Wild West, it's about those incredible larger-than-life figures of legendary gunslingers that you actually get to meet in the game. That's the cool part. Also, the whole thing is a mix of historical truth and the legends built around it, so a comic book style seems to be tailor-made for something like this. And there's the narrator and some other details that you might have noticed, like when there's transitions between screens, you have something that looks like brushstrokes. All those sorts of details contribute to this presentation of playing inside a story that's being told by someone. Gunslinger's story in general would be told through the mouth of its main character, a reliably unreliable narrator claiming to have met many of the West's famous outlaws and lawbringers. The reason for this was twofold. If the budget ever ran out, a few levels could be cut out of the final product without affecting the main story, and because the game's backdrop, the Old West, was filled with half-truths and tall tales. So much history about the era is scattershot, with actual fact having to contend with fiction. Going back to Joyce, since truth and myth kinda mix, this is where you have all the twists, and it naturally came to some guy who's telling the story, and the other guy is like, well, I don't have the same version of what you're saying, so there's the interaction between the audience and the game, which is pretty cool. It came naturally. Wild West history was second nature to Techland, so they knew how to distort the truth in order to present an engaging story. This even extended to the gameplay. When going over the idea of the unreliable narrator, Harris Orkin, the other co-writer, told game developer that, I also thought that the use of this unreliable narrator would help us with a narrative problem always present in shooters. Ludonarrative dissonance, a term first coined by Clint Hawking, is when the game's mechanics directly clash with the narrative and story. Most playable characters in shooters are brutal mass murderers mowing down hundreds if not thousands, yet we still want the player to believe that the person they are piloting has a conscience and is not a complete homicidal maniac. In Gunslinger, the storyteller is exaggerating his exploits to improve the story and make himself into more of a hero than he might have been. Since the player is playing his story, it makes sense and makes fun of the fact that he/she can defeat hundreds of enemies single-handedly. It also explains why the enemies are such awful shots. Silas at one point even mentions the fact that his opponents can't shoot worth a damn yet have a seemingly endless supply of ammo. What's funny about this is that I can only think of two games where ludonarrative dissonance, I feel like such a wanker for even saying this phrase, is a problem: Uncharted and BioShock Infinite. For the former, that's only because Nathan Drake is presented as a fun-loving guy in the story while you butcher around 1,000 people in the gameplay. In the latter, however, Booker's supposed to be this peace-loving guy after Wounded Knee, yet casually rips people open like human gushers with the skyhook. That's neither here nor there, though, as BioShock Infinite had a whole heap of other issues like being an overhyped mess that was a decided downstep from the best game in that series. BioShock 2. I don't make the rules on that one, Chief. Gunslinger saw release on May 22nd, 2013, worldwide to PlayStation 3, 360, and PC, with a Switch port coming out on December 10th, 2019. Though in 2018, the game got delisted from a few storefronts because the publishing rights reverted back to Techland. Now you know why I don't like digital only, however, Gunslinger was relisted. Too bad for the cartel, though, as it too was delisted and is still stuck in limbo. You can't buy that game on Steam. The version of Gunslinger I played was the Steam release. Our tale begins in what could be considered one of the last years of the Wild West, 1910. While John Marston is busy being coerced into a plan that will see himself and his family butchered on their farm, the only survivor his son, a lone bounty hunter rolls into a bar in Abilene, Kansas.
Don't I know you, sir?
Don't believe so. I haven't been here in many years. Name's Silas Greaves.
Said bounty hunter is Silas Greaves, at least a young lad in the establishment named Dwight calls him that as he recognizes the man from a dime novel. Seeing that his reputation has preceded him and wanting to tell the truth of his many exploits, Silas gathers round everyone else in the bar, two other customers named Jack and Steve, the barmaid Molly and the owner Ben, to weave a tapestry featuring many of the West's famous gunfighters.
That's Jack and Steve. Ben's behind the bar. Oh, I bet you got some great stories.
A couple.
Any of them true?
Jack, be nice.
A few.
What about your shootout with Henry Plummer's gang? in Bannock, Montana. Is that where you started as a bounty hunter? That's what it says in this here dime novel.
Don't believe everything you read in them dime novels, boy. First man I hunted was back when I was riding with Billy the Kid.
You knew Billy the Kid?
Damn right. That scrawny son of a bitch had no fear. Wouldn't back down for nobody.
I heard he collected the 10 stars off any crooked lawman who crossed him.
It was a war, boy. The Lincoln County War. And Billy promised his regulators would take the life of every bastard who helped bushwhack John Tunstall.
Kid had a big chip on his shoulder and a hair-trigger temper. Made him dangerous as hell.
Though his stories are hard to gauge as being truthful or not, what with Jack and Dwight regularly arguing on the details of his adventures, there is a core to Silas's life. The murder of his brothers at the hands of Johnny Ringo, Jim Reed, and Roscoe Bob Bryant. The Greaves siblings regularly ran cattle within Juarez, Mexico, a place with a storied history in of itself. What with its cursed treasure, they place a second home to the three. Finished for the day, a young Silas winded down by gambling in the local bar where he went on a winning streak. He even earned an old Spanish coin, no doubt belonging to the treasure of Juarez. Since it's cursed, when the trio tried leaving Mexico the day after Silas's streak, they were jumped by the men the youngest Greaves sibling was gambling with. Johnny Ringo, Jim Reed, and Roscoe Bob Bryant. Not a fan of being humiliated, the three cowboys strung up the siblings, Bob placing the old coin in Silas's mouth before riding off into the sunset. Once again, not knowing that the coin is cursed, Silas survived the encounter, revenge on his mind as his brothers weren't so lucky. The point of telling the tales to his audience, which Silas admits weren't all real, was to suss out the bartender as Bob, the last of the three still living. A split in the story occurs as Silas can either continue down the road of revenge or make a detour towards redemption. Deciding that he has torn down the world around him enough, Silas notices that while both himself and Bob started on the same trajectory, they ended their lives differently. Silas, an old grizzled killer, and Bob, a respectable member of society. Not wanting the future to be filled with men like himself, Silas asks Dwight what he's doing with his life. Dwight, or I should say Dwight D. Eisenhower, has enlisted in the army. Telling him to abstain from pointless bloodshed and leaving the coin with Bob, our tale ends with Silas leaving the bar a better man.
See you out, Bob. See what kind of man you turned out to be. Maybe prod you into drawing on me. See, all those years on your trail turned me into a killer. Can't even remember who I was before you tried to murder me. You, on the other hand, walked that very same path in exactly the opposite direction.
What do you mean by that?
You think your life is worth sparing, Bob? Boy, what's your name again?
It's Eisenhower, sir. Dwight Eisenhower.
What do you plan to do with your life, Dwight Eisenhower?
Tomorrow I'll be leaving for West Point, sir.
So, you want to be a soldier? Well, then do it right, son. Don't tear down the world out of anger and spite like I did. You build it up. You do something decent with your life, you hear me?
Sir? Yes, sir.
I won't have it said I left you with nothing, Bob.
While you could examine the life of Silas Greaves as another example of what the path of an Avenger does to a person, there's a much more interesting angle to look at, the ideas of storytelling. Multiple times throughout Silas's recollections, he either embellishes the truth or adds a bit of suspense to keep his audience engaged. Sure, you can look at it as him lying about parts of his life, as I do believe that Silas was a successful bounty hunter, what with a dime novel written about him. I just doubt the legitimacy of his interactions with the more famous characters of Wild West lore. To try and flesh out Bob, as that is what what he was ultimately doing, but then why snap Steve out of his sleep? Why get audibly annoyed over the other characters talking about the Titanic during an action set piece? It's because deep down, I personally believe that while Silas is wanting to flesh out Bob, he also wants to entertain the people in the bar. To Silas, it doesn't matter if his story is true or not, as long as someone is getting a kick out of it, Silas has done his duty. That's why he gets so agitated with Jack, who demands the stories to have airtight logic. Diametrically opposed to Jack is Dwight, who generally takes most of what Silas says at face value. What I will say is that neither viewpoint is wrong, but both have trappings each fall into. For Jack, it's that he nitpicks. Not everything in a story needs to be overtly explained. A story isn't reality. To quote Ed Wood, haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief? To make this doubly ironic, when Silas is going over his encounter with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Jack point blank tells him that there is no way he could have killed them. They died in Bolivia. That is the go-to conclusion to their lives, but what honestly happened to the two isn't known because of how poorly this time period was recorded in history. Both endings are equally truthful because reality hasn't provided an answer. The only reason why Jack tries to shoot down Silas's version of history is because he believes himself to be smarter than the storyteller. Now, there is a case to be made that Silas is doing a bit of self-insertion and propping up his importance in history, which is another takeaway you can get from the character, but that covers a different subject that I will go over later. On the flip side, Dwight never challenges Silas's viewpoint. Take when the bounty hunter recounts his time chasing the Wild Bunch. Recorded in history was that the Pinkertons were also following the gang, meaning Silas would have had backup, but when Dwight mentions that, Silas throws out a limp explanation that he was by himself. Not in the manner that he gave when chasing after the Dalton brothers, he was late when reaching Coffrey and just mucked in. Silas just flat out says that the Pinkertons weren't there when they would have been. This could be Silas once again wanting to add suspense to his tale, or he could be actively lying to pull the wool over the eyes of his storytime group. Hell, it could even be both, but what matters is that Dwight just rolls with it, possibly because of his love of dime novels, possibly because Silas would be considered his senior and has more life experience. Why should Dwight question his elders? The only time he chases the point is when Silas presents something completely false, the death of Frank James. And in this, you see the microcosm. Silas's tale is the representative of the entire Wild West era. The reason why his stories don't add up is because most Wild West stories don't add up. Using Billy the Kid, he was claimed to have killed 21 people before he even turned 21, but most personal accounts describe him as soft-spoken, preferring to rustle cattle than get into gunfights. Does this mean that Billy didn't kill 21 people? Maybe. Billy did have a share of blood on his hands, with some kills being confirmed by historians. Yet so much word of mouth spread around about Billy, whether by members of his own crew, by the lad himself, or people who were inspired by what they heard about him because he was an outlaw, that the murders of 21 men didn't seem out of the ordinary. You could best describe the Wild West era as a real-life fantasy with actual consequences. Regular people were raised up as mythical figures because of their supposed exploits, their bloody, ruthless exploits that may not even have happened. We regard figures like Billy, Earp, James, and many others as these storied men, but at the end of the day, half were criminals, half had a badge that legally allowed them to kill, and most of what they did were probably ghost stories meant to frighten others or folk tales meant to entertain that winded up superseding actual historical fact. This is a line so blurry that good guys and bad guys don't exist. Why do you think Silas questions himself on whether he was doing the right thing or not? He has that insight into the reality of the Wild West. No one was really worth celebrating because they were just regular people who had tales spun around them. This isn't me saying that you can't enjoy or find the feats of these figures fascinating. Wild West history is a topic of many appeals. Look at films such as Tombstone, a loose historical account on the OK Corral and Earp Vendetta ride, or the Dollars Trilogy. Just don't get lost in the fantasy of it all, as you truly do a disservice to yourself when you do that. A much more appealing Borderlands is how I would describe Gunslinger visually. Both games go for the cel shading style, but one doesn't beat me over the head with shitty writing or remind me that I'm giving money to that rascally rapscallion Randy, whose crime should be punished by having to listen to all the terrible Borderlands dialogue till his head explodes in a goriest display of irony. Some days you wake up wanting to choose violence. While every character is stylized under the Wild West aesthetic, some better than others, what speaks out to me the most is the use usage of color, mainly red/orange. You will always know where you're being shot from. Every enemy is either fluorescent orange or bright red. Not to the point that they are detracting from the game, mind you, but bright enough where they don't get lost in the scenery.
That's how the cowboys identified each other. I was beginning to wish I had one myself. But I wasn't about to let Ringo walk away unscathed. And that's what drove me forward.
They say that Ringo was infernally fast.
I hardly saw anyone faster, boy. Certainly not Wyatt Earp. That man was all hat and no cap.
I don't know if this has happened to anyone else in the peanut gallery, but I know that when I've played some FPSs, I've run into the issue where I don't know from what location I'm being shot from. Gunslinger gives you easy to identify enemies, so you don't have that issue, and they become even easier to spot when using concentration. While settings in Gunslinger are kinda stock, the craziest the game gets is the swamp and the ghost town, both the visual highlights in the game. The masterful color application prevents them from bleeding into the background. I remember the cool blues of nighttime or cave shootouts, or the lush greens breathing the forest levels to life.
I swear I couldn't see any way out of this trap. But suddenly, one just appeared. Kinda like a miracle.
Hats especially go off for making the color orange not overwhelming. Perhaps the best parts of the visuals are the cutscenes, as they go for a dime novel style, which it lands quite well, and the ever-changing aspects of the levels. The cutscenes aren't heavily animated, but that gets across that they are like illustrations in a book.
That's why I went after Henry Plummer.
Now, wasn't he the sheriff who augmented his income by shaking down miners and robbing gold shipments?
That's the one.
Oh, yeah, I remember him. He ran that gang of thieving outlaws called the Innocents.
So it's true that you went toe-to-toe with him?
Indeed I did, son. Indeed I did.
This gets compounded when you encounter a boss character where a little mini bio is given to you containing what they are known for. Befitting of the word-of-mouth nature that the story is going for, the levels will morph into shape when Silas brings something to attention. Not only is it a creative way for the player to go through a level, as suddenly fog might overtake a level or a whole sequence will play out only for Silas to stop himself and provide a much more suitable starting point, it keeps them on their toes.
Steve. Steve.
Huh? Oh, no, I'm listening.
Indians surrounded me from all sides.
Indians? There are Indians?
No. I just wanted to make sure Steve was paying attention. Now, where was I?
You were following the Daltons through a swamp?
That's right. See, Steve? Dwight's paying attention.
No, I'm listening. I was just resting my eyes.
Even the act of taking damage makes it seem like the story is falling apart, as it looks like bullets are blasting through a film strip, highlighting how this is more of a tale than the truth. Literally a story full of holes. Animations are good across the board, though nothing worth mentioning besides some of the idle animations Silas has. Speaking of Silas, John Saigan steals the show as the character. He provides a nice gruff bounty hunter front that slowly gives way to a man who's trying to convince the circle of people he is in that his tales are real, while also displaying how disturbed he is.
Oh, did you ever find him? Who? The man you are after.
Let me ask you something, Ben. You ever think about death?
Mr. Greaves, are you all right?
Ooh, death. Oh, death. Won't you spare me over till another year? What is this that I can't see, with ice cold hands taking hold of me? Well, I am death, none can excel. I'll open the door to heaven or hell. Oh, death, oh, death, won't you spare me over till another year?
So are you gonna answer the question?
What question is that?
Jim Reed. Did you ever find him?
Reed was indeed that son bitch's surname. That's right, Ben. A despicable character. I remember him laughing like a hyena that cold morning they lynched me and my brothers. He was intent on avoiding my vengeance, but nothing was gonna stop me. Nothing.
John even provides a bit of levity as Silas, showing some impeccable comedic timing. I pour one out for you, Chief.
Where would I find the gentleman's facilities? Suddenly I have an urgent need to drain my one-eyed snake. Well, I've had more than a few drinks, and I've been sitting here for quite a spell.
Right through there. Let me show
I
you.
never heard so much malarkey in my life.
You think he's bullshitting us?
You don't think he's Silas Greaves?
I think he's just some old drunk looking for some free liquor.
I don't know, Jack. I think I believe him. You don't think he met Jesse James?
Boy, you gotta be kidding me. That story makes no sense at all.
Jack.
I mean, you gotta be 2 bricks short of a load to believe that cock and bull story.
I don't agree.
Jack, lay off the
But
bar.
you seriously think that tired old man went toe-to-toe with Jesse James?
Well, that's better. Did I mention that this Jim was married to the infamous Belle Starr? Of course, I didn't learn that until later. Anyway, I made my way forward the best I could. Around the sides, over the roof. At some point, some sumbitch saw me and shouted out, "It's the damn Pinkerton!" It's the damn Pinkerton! Now, I never worked for that limey cocksucker. But I guess they assumed I was one of his assassins. Those evil bastards firebombed Jesse's mother's house and killed his stepbrother. It was no wonder each and every asshole on that train wanted me dead.
Everybody's always mistaking you for somebody else, aren't they? Why is that, I wonder?
Don't rightly know, Jack. I'm just telling you how I remember.
I also chalk that up to the game's script, as one of my favorite parts of it is when you stray away from a playable area, the game tells you that you are moving away from the story. Silas even comments on how he could have died in set scenarios if the player does die, such as shooting dynamite on the bridge. The last thing to honestly mention is the music and sound. Both go for that classic Wild West soundscape, and just like the cutscenes, they get it right. However, what is generally phenomenal is the sound design when it comes to game specifics. Whenever you have full concentration, the game plays a jingle to alert you that it's time to use it. Same goes for Sense of Death, as when it's fully recharged, it too plays a sound. My only complaint, and stop me if you've ever heard this one, is that I wouldn't listen to the OST outside the context of the game. Call of Juarez Gunslinger is an arcadey Wild West shooter with light exploration and RPG mechanics. On the whole, there are 3 game modes: Story, Arcade, and Duels. Story is the main mode, following Silas's ever-winding tales of possible, truth, probable malarkey. Arcade, on the other hand, sees the player try to keep a combo string going from the beginning of a level to the end. Think Village's mercenary mode, just with no shop or multiple stages. There is also a class system where the player can pick their starting loadout and skills. Classes level up like Silas does in the main story, but I'll go more into leveling up when I'm done here. The last of the modes is Duels. It pits the player in a series of duels that increase in difficulty as the player wins. Out of all the modes, I will stick to Story the most, as Arcade and Duels are in the spotlight, though they're still fun. Before even starting the story, the player has to select their difficulty, which there are 3 of: Normal, Hard, and True West. Befitting the nature of this show, I chose Normal difficulty, though I have beaten the game before on Hard. All that really changes between the difficulties is time to kill. Silas on higher skill levels dies quickly, while enemies enemies on the other hand take a bit more punishment. Only a bit though, as Silas gets well overpowered in the mid to late game and on New Game Plus. New Game Plus is only unlocked when the player beats Gunslinger for the first time, and while it allows you to decimate the West with a fully leveled up Silas, New Game Plus also provides a bit more clarity to the story. Levels in Gunslinger are mostly linear, though there are a few sections where the player can putz around to find the game's main collectible, Nuggets of Truth. Outside of informing the player about the reality of Wild West culture and figures, Nuggets of Truth award the player a hefty amount of experience points, thus meaning that there is a gameplay purpose to finding them, unlike other video game trinkets. Already collected Nuggets of Truth carry over to new games, so you can potentially start a fresh run of Gunslinger with some levels under your belt. However, what you will be spending most of your time doing is getting into gun battles, as no matter where Silas goes, bandits, gang members, or in all honesty people just trying to defend their land will materialize out of nowhere to do him harm. Luckily, gunslinging isn't Silas's blood, as he has quite a knack for firearms. There are only 6 guns in total for the game, not counting any turret section or the sawn-off rifle. The 6-shooter, the ranger, the quick shooter, the sawn-off shotgun, the regular shotgun, and the rifle. Weapons themselves can be separated into 2 categories from those 6. Small arms and long arms. Silas always carries a small, all the pistols and the sawn-off shotgun, and long, the rifle and regular shotgun, armed with him, but he can also dual wield. While this only applies to the pistols and the sawn-offs, and Silas can't use any combination of them, preferring to akimbo wield the same weapon instead of being experimental, technically Silas has 4 ways to attack, the 4th being dynamite. Though dynamite is rare, it acts like a grenade, though it can be shot to make it explode early. Every weapon has varying statistics, as amongst the pistols they scale from power, balance, and speed. The Ranger is the strongest pistol, usually able to down anyone in one shot regardless if it's a headshot or not, but it has a slow reload. Moving onward, the 6-shooter hits that solid medium between the Ranger and Quick Shooter, being not too fast and weak, but not too slow and powerful. Lastly, the Quick Shooter has the fastest reload, but instead of chambering the gun for its actual cartridge, that being .44 Smith & Wesson American, the world of Gunslinger thought it'd be funny to make it shoot BBs. As such, the Quick Shooter needs to land headshots unless you like wasting ammo. While single firing any of the pistols or sawn off, Silas can aim down sights. When going akimbo though, Silas can only focus his aiming, though he's still pretty much a crack shot. This is how you do ADS for dual wielding. For the long arms, the shotgun has devastating power at close range, but suffers major damage drop-off as if you're playing COD. The rifle, on the other hand, is probably the best weapon in the game, dealing more damage than the shotguns, having better range than the pistols, and having more ammo in the clip than both weapon types. Though which weapon you want to use is usually up to you, and Silas starts off each level with a full loadout basically designed for the stage unless his storytelling says otherwise, which can dictate level set pieces and encounters, to name a few things it does. What your game plan should be with any gun is trying to rack up large combos. Killing an enemy in Gunslinger kicks off a combo which dissipates in a few seconds unless you kill another enemy, increasing the combo by 1, or shooting certain environmental objects, though in that case it just retains the score. Because this is the core of the gameplay, once a combo starts, do everything in your power to keep it going, as higher combos award more experience points. Likewise, performing certain actions also earns extra experience points. Killing an enemy provides 50 to 75 points, but landing a headshot gives 100. Scoring a headshot as soon as the enemy appears gives you even more, as you fulfill blink of an eye. Doing so from a far distance away adds even more points. Gunslinger can best be described as Wild West Bulletstorm, though there are no penalties for stale moves. Gunning down a whole heap of desperados quickly and efficiently is the trick for leveling up quicker. To facilitate this, Silas has access to concentration. Anytime Silas kills an enemy, he earns a tiny bit of concentration, with headshots earning more that he can activate at any time. He doesn't need a full bar to do so, though having one is the best usage of it. When activated, time slows down as Silas is able to react, as he can see bullets and their trajectories and attack in near real time. His guns also get a damage boost, and all score values are increased in concentration. That's not all Silas has at his disposal though. I said he has shoot, dodging, and he does. Whenever Silas takes fatal damage, Sense of Death will activate. The game will focus on whoever shot the killing blow and their bullet that will kill you. It's up to you to dodge it, either leaning left or right depending on what side the bullet is on. Failing leads to death, while succeeding refreshes Silas's health. Sense of Death will then go on a cooldown of around 20 seconds. This doesn't apply to bosses or certain types of damage, mind you. When Silas dies, he might say something about his death to the audience before allowing you to retry at one of the many generous checkpoints. Keeping Sense of Death in mind acts as the other component when going for large combos. Concentration is the offense, Sense of Death is the defense. Of course, with certain skills in mind, both have additional functionality, such as Sense of Death activating concentration for free or concentration instantly refilling after certain multiples are hit during a combo. As stated previously, most action Silas can do earns him experience points that he can spend on skills. Each time Silas levels up, he will need more XP to do so again, but it's easier to gain more with skills. There are a total of 3 skill trees, each centered around a weapon type with 12 skills in each. Each skill tree has 2 separate paths, top and bottom, and you have to follow them linearly. No pick and choosing. However, each half of a skill tree contains a weapon upgrade that only needs 4 skills to get. Trust me, you want those better weapons as not only do they look cool being ornate collector's firearms, they fix any issue that is central to the base weapon. For as much variety there is when it comes to Silas, his enemies are simple in their affairs. Most are interchangeable, coming at him with either revolvers or rifles. There are some specialty enemies though, like grenadiers, shielders, melee runners, and shotgunners. Some bosses themselves are just beefed up enemies or a turret that requires dynamite. Keyword some, as most boss fights are duels. In a duel, Silas has to take care of 2 categories: speed and focus. Speed determines how quickly Silas will clear lever, while focus is how accurate he will be. There are 2 ways of winning a duel, honorably and dishonorably, but the catch is experience. Winning a duel honorably, I.E, letting your opponent draw on you first, gives you experience, while winning dishonorably, drawing first as the heartbeat noise is playing, doesn't earn you experience. Most duels are the same except for 3. Facing hardened requires you to lean, which you can do in any duel to dodge bullets. Dealing with the Daltons has you gun down 2 opponents both facing you, while the Mexican standoff against Butch and Sundance has you switch focus between the 2, as you can only gain it by looking at whoever is looking at you. Lastly, there are some QTEs in the game where you can gun down up to 5 enemies trying to get you. Failing them just kicks you out of the sequence, but they are so easy that it never happened to me. What I didn't mention in the story is that it is humorous. Despite the ongoing revenge narrative and the centerfold of it being the stone cold serious hanging of 3 people, Silas in Gunslinger does have a sense of humor. I will always be reminded of the many fail statements that Silas can make during some parts of the game. Take when Silas is going for a mine-to-bag Henry Plummer. There is a section where the player has to watch their shots, otherwise a massive amount of explosive barrels will instantly kill them. In any other game, shooting them will cause a game over with no fanfare. In Gunslinger, Silas tells both the player and his audience that he's glad that he didn't make such a fatal mistake, otherwise he would have been blown to smithereens. Shooting the dynamite during the bridge level can elicit the same response. Though these thoughts from him are level specific, there are a good number of them. Falling off the train when chasing Jesse James is another moment where Silas can comment on his hypothetical failure scenario. What's funny is that for each game over, Silas can say a few number of things as if to get across how dangerous his bounty hunting days were. Then there are the moments where Silas's story falls apart. Because Silas is recounting his tales of chasing after outlaws from long ago, sometimes his tales don't add up. This leads to wild deviations in the gameplay, as one moment you can go from slowly marching your way through a swamp to having to deal with Native Americans, all because Steve started dozing off in the middle of Silas's spiel. Gunslinger will even slow down to showcase how the story has become derailed, always with comments from either Silas, the bar patrons, or both. In the same level that I'm referencing, there is a massive diversion from a huge action set piece just to talk about the Titanic, annoying Silas because he's reached a juicy part of his story. I will never not laugh at the scene, especially since it deflates all tension in Silas's boat escape. Going back to the Henry Plummer level, because the story directs you into the mine shaft, you don't expect the curveball of dying at the end of the section. What a cool way to catch even the player off guard, something Silas even hints at when he tells the bar that if he did take the shaft, there would be no way for him to survive. The player would just think, okay, this is how I need to advance through the level, not this is a dumb idea and shouldn't work. This moment also helps to solidify how unreliable Silas is, as even the player doesn't know how he'll unfold his narrative. My favorite moment of this is during the Jesse James train level. Not only are there the funny death quotes from falling off the train, Silas legitimately has to take a piss break during the middle of the stage, causing a part of it to repeat until he gets back. While I could pick apart all the scenes in the game that I like, as the offhand reveal of Dwight being Eisenhower is another cool moment, I wouldn't be covering the gameplay now, would I? For a summation, it's frantic, chaotic, and addicting. As I'm writing this right now, I feel the urge to boot up Gunslinger because of how well the simple shooting mechanics blend with the combo and skill systems. Gunslinger becomes less of a shooter and more of a gallery, as it's insane what you can pull off with proper placement and skills. You start to approach encounters in such a way where instead of just wanting to kill enemies, you want to do it in such a manner where you get the highest payouts and can keep your combo for longer. Sometimes this might be easy to an infinitesimal degree, other times you might have to put a bit of thought into your combo spree. Knowing that concentration keeps your combo going for longer as it slightly slows down its degradation rate is one of the most important understandings one can come to in Gunslinger. Popping it just to give yourself a tiny bit more time on the clock for a clutch combo continuation is satisfying to the fourth power. The same goes for easily keeping a combo going. Silas's return trip to the forest chasing after Jesse's brother has one of my favorite sections in the entire game because it just throws wave after wave of enemies at you to test your combo skills. I ended it with a streak around 100 solely because of my devil may care attitude and placements of skill points. It helps that all the weapons -1 feel great to use. There's a combination of good sound design, enemy feedback, and animation for all the weapons, and I like how each gun feels decidedly different from the other. Even though half the weapon roster is revolvers, they don't blend together. While I do have my favorites, the Ranger and the Rifle are my OTP for the game, and you can't tell me otherwise, I can see why someone else would use a specific weapon. Probably the highlight of the game are the duels. They have been a staple in the Juarez series, but while the previous games had fiddly ones, Bound and Bloods were nightmarish from my recollection, I love how they reflect the simplicity that the game is going for. All you have to pay attention to is speed and focus, easy concepts to understand and engage with. Then Gunslinger starts switching it up on you, cranking up the tension which boils over in the fantastic final duel being a Wild West classic, a Mexican standoff. For the first time in the series, I only have one complaint. Shotguns are pretty much useless because of their short range and clip size. They get outclassed by the rifles, which take up the slot that the shotgun can occupy, or any of the revolvers. Doubly so goes for the sawn-offs, which I never saw the point of ever picking up. While the shotguns do become better with upgrades, so does everything else. The only positive notion going for the shotguns is that they get an upgrade that allows them to fire without reloading during concentration. Yet there are so many reloading skills that the other guns get, as well as concentration reload, that makes the shotgun skill a moot point. It doesn't help that the shotguns get tied together with the explosive skills. Dynamite is fun to play around with, as the skills for it allow for cluster bombs or quick detonations by way of shooting a lit stick right after you throw one, but you never need to use explosives in regular encounters. They are a nice alternate option for dealing with foes, but guns are more consistent, so spending points on explosives just to get the shotgun ones is a waste. Is Gunslinger the best straight-edge Wild West shooter? I would say yes. Its frantic, fast-paced gameplay and backdrop of Wild West legend crafting makes it well worth your time. This game proves that budget titles can easily step up to AAA games. It is on the short side, my run of the game only taking 3 hours, and while I don't view that as a negative, I know some people might take umbrage with how short the game is. That's why collectibles, New Game Plus, and alternate modes exist. Gunslinger is best played on PC, but it is on Switch for those that want gunslinging on the go. Might have been my least favorite history section to write for. Like Fillmore said about the chicken, it was dry. Real dry. And that's mostly because Techland was doing anything and everything to bounce back from the cartel. Speaking of that game, you can only play it if you have the physical version or if you buy it from a key site. I get that Techland is not proud of that one, but I think barring it off from anyone buying it is short-sighted. I've said before that bad games are important. They teach you about good ones. Like with old games, bad ones need preservation as well. There's also the ongoing issue with the company surrounding Dying Light 2 and reported mismanagement. I won't speak on it more than that. I learned from Detroit not to be a gobshite. We'll never live that one down. Oh, and another thing, we now have a subreddit. Thank friend of the show. Always wanted to say that. Max Duding for it. I don't typically use social media. As you can see, I don't have a Twitter link, but I know of its importance regarding something like this. Oh, and the month of October is creeping up on us, so expect the next few videos to be more horror themed. I say this knowing in advance what I'm going to be covering after the next game I do. Speaking of, this showing of Call of Juarez Gunslinger is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving a villain protagonist, middling third-person shooting, and a huge moral outrage.